Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Artist Fund's Professional Development Webinar Series. This event will be about writing effective artist statements and bios, and we'll be joined by artist Mike Tauber and writer Marrie Stone. I'm Wendy Worth, president of the Artist Fund at the Festival of Arts in Laguna Beach. We're a nonprofit that was created to assist FOA artists, past and present, with financial hardship. But we also offer career-enhancing services like this webinar, and you'll find more info about our nonprofit at that website there. And before we begin, I'd like to review a little about our Artist Fund grant program. This is for any past or present Festival of Arts exhibitor that's a working artist, and you may apply for grants year-round. We have two types. Our hardship grant, which was designed for those suffering financial hardship. These applications are very discreet, and we protect the privacy of our applicants. The second is the enrichment grant, and that's for merit-based, and that's for artists seeking to enhance their careers. We hope you look into these opportunities and also share with your fellow exhibitors. Today's topic will be writing effective artist statements and biographies. We'll be approaching festival exhibit season very soon, and what they require from us as artists is an artist statement and a biography that appears on the Festival of Arts websites. So even if you've already done a bio or a statement previously, you might want to take a look now. It's a great time to review written materials, make sure that you're making the most out of the statement. Today, you'll learn the purpose of artist statements and bios and how they differ from each other, the Festival of Arts rules for each one, the target audience for each type, and we'll be reviewing examples of various approaches to artist statements and bios. So we've engaged two speakers today, Marrie Stone, who's a local freelance writer, great experience in writing about art and artists, and she'll share her insights on our topic today, along with Mike Tauber, a very well-known Festival of Arts artist who writes marketing materials and newsletters for organizations all over Laguna Beach. And he'll be our moderator for today's event. So a little bit about our speakers. We're excited to introduce Marrie Stone, who is a wonderful writer. She has a wealth of information regarding writing about the visual arts. She's interviewed hundreds of artists across all types of mediums, and she's especially active in our local art scene here in Laguna Beach. She's taught at Susie Q. She's written all kinds of articles for, I'm sure you've read many of her works. She also co-hosts the weekly podcast Writers on Writing. So for more information, there's her website there. And our other speaker is Mike Tauber, a very well-known Festival of Arts exhibitor, and he's an advisor at the Artist Fund. He creates his own art in paint, ceramic tile, and cement relief. He does a lot of support work for us here at the Artist Fund, providing our newsletter for us and other great marketing pieces for Artist Fund and many other local arts organizations. Also joining us today will be Sharon Jackman. Sharon's a great Festival of Arts exhibitor with a lengthy history of exhibition. She's the chairperson of our professional development committee here at the Artist Fund. And later on, we'll be using her bio as an example in the presentation about how to improve your work. So with that, remember that you can pause this webinar at any time. You can stop the recording and review the information, and it'll be helpful. It'll be posted on our website forever, so you can refer back at any time. So with that introduction, I'll hand it over to Mike Tauber, and he'll be our moderator for today's presentation. Mike.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I'm really excited that the Artist Fund is putting together this presentation. I think it's very important and very needed, and I'm very excited of the content and what Marrie has to say today. So let's start by explaining what is the difference between an artist statement and a bio.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, you guys. This is fun. So artist statements for the purpose of Laguna's festivals, particularly the Festival of the Arts, are very short. They are 1 or 2 sentences. They're no more than 30 words. they tend to be focused on the work itself, either your body of work as a whole or the exhibition you're currently showing. The more specific to your art and your vision you can make these, absolutely the better. Meaning, ideally, another artist wouldn't be able to lift your statement and apply it to their work. Obviously, biographies are focused toward the artist as opposed to toward the work. They're about you. They're about your education. They're about your experience. They're about your honors and awards, and an opportunity to tell jurors, you've kind of got two audiences here, jurors and potential buyers or collectors, to tell them a little bit more about yourself and some of your personal details. Reasonable minds can differ about these. I should say at the outset, there's no such thing as perfection. There's no such thing as pleasing everyone. We will all have different takes on some of these as we talk about them. The goal is simply to represent yourself as well and as accurately as possible. So I have provided an example. This is Christopher Allwine's example, just for you to see what these are going to look like. This is on the FOA website. The Sawdust Festival and Art Affair have their own, but this is what it's going to look like. You can see the artist statement at the top, very short, and you can see the bio is a little bit more extensive. This one doesn't show. Oh, yes, this one does. So the artist statement in this is it written in the first person. Chris shows, darkness is my canvas. First person statements are directed I, me, my, and you'll notice that his bio is third person. Chris, Christopher Allwine written in the third person as though he's talking about someone else. So anyway, this is an example of that. This is what it's going to look like.
I wanted to point out a couple features on that previous slide that when you're looking at the Festival of Arts, this is one artist web page. Everyone will have their own. So not visible on this example, all the pictures of the artist's work will be above this banner. And also, if you look over to the right side, you'll see that the artist's contact information and a link to their website appears on this page too. So this is the thing we really want to focus on as a festival exhibitor, and all the people that are going to be wanting to meet us, whether they're a museum curator, a gallery, or a collector, this is really the place. You could send them this link, and they'll look at it sometimes before they come to the festival to learn about the artists that they want to see when they're there. So this is really your home base for getting people to your exhibit booth.
Yeah.
Okay, so Marrie, an artist statement. You told us that the artist statement is a little different from the bio. Could you explain a little bit more about the differences?
Yeah. So again, the artist statement is going to be really, very short. You really have a very limited amount of time, and it has to be pretty punchy. It's got to be one or two sentences, and it's got to be outward focused. It's really got to focus on the art itself or your vision for the art. Again, the bio, is going to be inward focused. It's going to be about you. It's going to be about your experiences, your education level, different shows that you've shown at. But as you can see, if you recall Christopher's, his bio is much, much longer, 2 or 3 paragraphs, is somewhat typical. But one is outward focused, one is inward focused, one is first person, and one is third person.
Okay, so the artist statement is 30 words, and this is mostly about the art. So let's get a little bit more specific about the approaches we could take to the artist statement, because I know there's a lot of different ones.
There are, I mean, there are probably endless ones. I've highlighted just a few of the numerous approaches that artists have taken to their statements, so you can get just some idea for different ways to come at this. And I should also mention now, I'll mention it again later, that, all of these examples are all over these websites, either the festival website, the Sawdust Festival, or Art Affair website. They all have these statements and bios. So you can get examples of these at all 3 of those websites if you're feeling stuck. But I came at this from 4 different approaches, and we're going to walk through those now. The first approach is statements that set a goal or intention for your work. You can ask yourself, what's my name? What's my aim? What's my art trying to do? What do I want people to take away from this? So full disclosure, Ron Azevedo asked me to help him craft this statement, which brings me to my first point, which is that listening to how other people react to your work can be really helpful. Listen to what they notice, listen to what words they use to describe your work. Often we're so close to our own work that it's hard to see it with fresh eyes. And so getting others to respond to our work is one way that you can kind of, get third party feedback on how to craft your statement. So Ron's a photographer who has done a lot of work in the Ukraine prior to the war. And so I really saw a lot of storytelling about the what might have been. And that's what attracted me to his work. So that's what I focused in on there. For Christopher Allwine, to go back to his, I really love this phrase, darkness is my canvas and painting with light. That's very evocative to me. I want to understand what he's doing. Using light as a paintbrush, I think is really interesting. That makes me curious. This is sort of next level writing, but the sounds of those words together, the repetition of the S's and the cadence of darkness is my canvas is really, it sounds great in the mouth. So that's kind of a next level writing tip. When you read your statements out loud, which we'll talk about later, you'll catch those things. What sounds nice. What do you think of these, Mike?
I agree, and what I really love about all three of these is that it makes me want to look more closely at their work. And looking at Christopher Allwine's, you can actually see the brush strokes that he uses in his manipulations of the photography. So I think that this is a perfect example of showing how different the statements can and should be, and they're so individual to the artists themselves. These are really good examples.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. So another approach is to just try and get your viewer curious about what you're trying to do. And I really liked Luciano next to Roberto. They're both working in the same medium, which is jewelry, and they're both expats to our country. And Roberto really drew on his native language, which is Spanish, to arouse our curiosity. What do maquinitas mean? And first of all, I just love that word, and I love how he used it. And this fascination with little machines is very interesting. In total contrast to Luciano, who uses this great phrase, "less is more." What does that mean? And Mike, as you pointed out earlier, the photography of his jewelry is going to be sitting right next to it, but less is more for him, and that's not true of Roberto. So they've got these totally different approaches to their jewelry. You could not apply one to the other. And so that kind of shows off how an artist statement can really capture what's unique and individual to the artist. Yeah.
I agree with that one about that. Your statement, if you applied it to some other artists, that it wouldn't necessarily apply. I think that really helps that you've hit the nail on the head with your individuality and specifically bringing out aspects of your work that are real personal to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And for Bruce, I really love this use of the word parented. I think it's very unusual. And this idea of walking down a familiar path to discover something new is very intriguing. That all makes me want to see what he's talking about and look at his work closer and see if I can uncover he kind of posed a question or posed a secret. And, I feel like it's up to me to go discover what that secret is. I liked that.
Arouses the curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes your work might require a little more explanation. For Lisa, who's working in the textile arts, fabric arts, we might not understand exactly what she's doing. Her work's a little unusual. So, this is a nice opportunity for you to describe your work a little more. And she took that opportunity. Kirsten is working in a fairly traditional medium, but she's doing something a little bit different with it. And so you can look at, her artist statement is kind of inviting you to understand what she's doing within her medium that's different than other watercolor artists. I took the liberty of editing Paul Bond's statement. I love Paul's statement. I think it reads really well. But with just a little bit of editing, just a few words removed, I think there's an opportunity to tighten things up and make it a little bit more punchy and evocative for your viewer. So I just removed a couple words. You can read that at your leisure. To maybe you don't agree with me, but that's one opportunity, is to just play around with the language a little bit to make things a little bit punchier and a little bit, shorter and punchier.
You know, you talked a little bit earlier about how the words flow off your mouth, and your rewrite, it does seem to flow a little better, especially if you're reading it out loud. It's a writing style, I guess, but it just makes it a little bit more clean to read.
You should always, I should point that out again and again, you should always read your work out loud. There's so much you will catch when you do that. So yeah, I really recommend doing that. If you're still stuck and this is hard, or if you really feel like another thinker, artist, illuminary, someone else has said it better than you can rely on other people's quotations to explain your work. Here, Jacques Cousteau, who doesn't know Jacques Cousteau, and he does perfectly connect with Sean Brown's photography. I think, that's a nice mirror to hold up to Sean's work. So you can lift quotations from other artists if you're feeling really stuck. Sometimes I know a lot of artists who have quotations that sit around their canvases that are sort of guiding principles. And if that's true, maybe one of those are more appropriate to use for your artist statement as well. So that's another option to come at this.
I think that's really a good point. For example, Sean's, maybe people that are intimidated to talk about your work will know the films of Jacques Cousteau and all his work. And again, it opens a conversational talking point, or the viewer will automatically form a connection with your work. The one by Pilar is maybe appealing to a gallery curator or possibly a museum curator, because you're aligning your work with someone that's a past artist or something that's inspirational. So I think both of these are, I think it's really nice when artists put that in their statement.
I should say that, there is one caveat to this, which is really to try to choose a quote that zeroes in on your vision, your process, and your obsession. The tricky part about quotes is that some of them can be generic, and if they can, easily be applied to other people's work, you might lose the viewer's interest a little bit with that. But if they're really well chosen, and if they're really specific to you, they can, I agree, they can be really effective.
Okay, so that was statements, and now we're going to get to the long, big part of the artist's website page, and that is the biography, which can be up to 200 words. So let's hear about how to do a biography.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, biography is going to focus on you, your experience, your accomplishments, your education, your vision. And as I mentioned earlier, in contrast to the artist statement, these are going to be written in third person, meaning I will refer to myself as Marrie, not as me or I. Some people like to use their last name to keep formality and distance, and others like using their first name to establish intimacy or rapport with the people visiting their booths. That's up to you and your voice. The other thing I should mention at the outset, though, is that your biography should be tailored to the purpose that you're using it for. Obviously, if you're an electrician by trade and an artist by passion, your bios are going to look very different for those two professions. The emphasis is going to look very different. So I have personally roughly 4 different biographies that I use for the different roles that I play in life, and I tinker with them for every event. I tinkered with it for this event. So you really should make this very specific to your work at the festival. And this point might be a little bit next level, but if you're exhibiting in both the Festival of Arts and the Sawdust Festival, your bio might look slightly different for those 2 venues because they have totally different styles and feels. You could potentially tailor your language to fit the vibe of the Sawdust and to fit the vibe of the festival. It's not totally necessary, but that is a consideration.
I love that idea of having several different biographies. I as well have several different resumes depending on the type of art project I'm applying for. I want to go back to your mention of writing in the third person. I realize that some artists want it to be more personal, but I know that there's a lot of editors out there that will pick your biography because it's written in the third person. It's much easier for them to transfer right into their press release because there's less editing for them to do. So if you're want to be friendly to the press, you might want to consider doing it in the third person.
Yeah, actually, that's such a great point. And the other thing that I would say about writing in third person is that psychologically, it's a little bit easier to brag if you're writing in the third person. If you're saying, I've done this and I've done that, you know, it sounds a little bit, you're going to be hesitant to do that. If you're saying, Mike went to this amazing school, it's just a little bit easier to psychologically trick yourself into boasting a little bit more. And that's what your bio should do. I mean, this is you trying to sell yourself. So, you know, the more you can do that, the better. And we'll talk about various approaches of how to do that. So what I did was I took 5 different approaches to bios. Again, there are endless. I just plucked out 5 different structures that are fairly common. And so we're going to go through some of those structures depending on your experience in the arts, how long you've been at it, how you've made your life in the arts, and what you've accomplished. You can approach this very differently and play to your strengths instead of highlighting your weaknesses. So the first one is Vanita. So Vanita's a printmaker. She has led a very, what I would call, traditional life in the arts. She knew she wanted to be an artist from birth, and everything about her life has led in the same direction. So I call this sort of a V structure or an upside down triangle structure, that everything, it's very chronological. It starts out with where she was born, which is India. We would definitely want to know that. And then everything funnels in: her education, her teaching, her exhibitions, the way she approaches her art, the boards she sits on, the places she exhibits. All of that is leading her to this moment at the festival. And she ends with, you know, what she's doing specifically this year in the festival. So that is, it could, you know, all of these could be tinkered with and edited and tightened up. I'm not saying everyone is perfect, but this is a great example of a traditional chronological biography where everything in your life has sort of led you to where you are now.
Yeah, that one's really nice. And I think this one has a really nice flow to it. So that's a great example. I love your analogy of the visualizing the letter V for all this content. And at the bottom, it points right back down to your work, which is where we want to go.
She was nice to us by having her name being what it is. So the V really helped out. So the next one is kind of in total contrast to Vanita. So Pega did not have an upbringing in the arts. She grew up in Tehran. If my memory serves from interviewing her, her parents wanted her to be an engineer. So she didn't have any classical training in the arts. She didn't come to the arts until she immigrated to the US. So rather than highlighting that as a potential drawback, she talks about the why of her art. And she is, her art is very personal, it's very political, and it's informed by her upbringing and her experiences. So that's what she chooses to emphasize. I happen to know that Pega graduated from LCAD, and I believe she was working on an MFA. I know she has a BFA, and I think she's done with her MFA. So were I her, I would include that. I think it's important for us to know that she has an education in the arts. I think collectors and jurors would both want to know that. But it is a great example of somebody who, you know, sort of de-emphasized experience and de-emphasized education in favor of why they do what they do.
Yeah, do you think this it's a little on the short side, so she could have put more in there, but I don't know. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that.
There's not. I would say if you have experience, and she's been showing in the festival for a few years now. So all of that, in my opinion, I would include, if I was her, I would include my education. I think she's had a few articles written up about her work. I would, consider including those. And now that she's been in the festival for, several years, I would include that as well.
Plus, Laguna College of Art and Design is a local college that so many of are familiar with. So again, these biographies are giving us conversation or connection. So it can be a bridge to a conversation at her booth again. So I think I agree that would be nice if she put a mention of that in there.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about her work is that not everybody who comes to it completely understands what she's doing. I don't know that everybody automatically knows that this is a commentary on Iran and Iranian women. So it is good that she is talking about that in her bio, because it's not obvious from the work itself. So that's good. So Ron Azevedo is a great example of now what I would call a triangle as opposed to Venita's reverse triangle. So Ron has had a lot of outside acclaim, and he's been honored. And so he leads with that. And I think if that is the case for you, that's a great option to call your accolades out. You want to lead with your strongest foot forward. I do think this bio could be tightened up in a few places, but it's a great example of starting with a heavy hitting punch of being named, most artistic photographers in Orange County at the top, and then kind of flowing down from there through his background and experiences. The other thing that Ron does is to give us some of the people who collect him. He's got some, heavy named patrons who collect his work. And, I think that's reasonable minds can differ on this. It's a little tricky because it could be considered name dropping. I personally like it because it gives me added confidence in my investment if I know some other big name people are investing in Ron's work. So that can kind of play either way, but it is good to make note that you have significant collectors or patrons if you have them. I don't know what your feeling is about that, Mike.
Yeah, well, on Ron's, well, number one, I would get approval or from your patrons that you're going to be using their name in the bio, because some of them appreciate some privacy. So whenever you're doing that, make sure that these people are aware you're going to be doing it. I do love this outside acclaim. I see the reference to the triangle again. I love the visuals, but he opens the bio with a bang. The most artistic photographer in Orange County. That really captures your attention immediately. So I really like Ron. This is very, very impactful, and I do agree with you. There could be a couple of few things pulled out of here, but overall it's pretty phenomenal.
The other thing I'd point out about it is that he gives us a little bit of personal information so we can connect to him. Mm-hmm. Sometimes shy visitors at the festival want to talk to artists, but they don't know how. So by saying, hey, I'm from Big Bear, or hey, I'm from Michigan, or we both went to NYU. Sorry. It gives you an opportunity to connect with your visitors.
Yeah, I really agree with that. With the biography, so many people will walk up to your booth and start talking to you, and it's really interesting what they pick out of your biography as a talking point. And they say that to me all the time. If I mention I grew up in the Illinois or Chicago area, that sometimes they'll lead with that and then we'll migrate into talking about my work and my booth. So I think that's something good to keep in mind, is among your career is also throwing a few personal snippets in there that may generate some conversation. I think that's a positive for sure.
Yes. So Carolyn is a great example of somebody who focuses on her process over her accomplishments. And she does have a lot of accomplishments. But you wouldn't necessarily know what she's doing in her art just by looking at it. So she's used her bio to really explain a little bit behind what's going on in her work. And I really like it. I think it's good. Yeah.
I think, I'm surprised that Carolyn's is this short, because I know she has a very long career and is a very prolific artist. I know, for example, she does teaching for local arts education every year for many years. So it's interesting that she didn't put that in there. But again, maybe she just, I guess, like you said, it's okay to keep it short and concise too. I guess that one thing, if you say I teach art, then you may generate invitations to teach art. Maybe that's not what you're looking for anymore. So I guess to be mindful of that, what you put in is what you're going to get back out. So maybe she's not interested in expanding her teaching repertoire.
That's a good point. Yeah. So Maria is working in a medium that not a lot of people know about. I think she's the only scratchboard artist in the festival. So she's used her bio to really describe the art itself. And I think that's a good idea. You know, I think if you don't have a deep understanding of what scratchboard art is and what goes into it, it's good to educate your viewer a little bit. And she came to art later in life. She doesn't have a big education in it. And so, you know, she de-emphasizes sort of the educational component and the experience and talks more about the art itself. She also talks about, you know, the self-taught aspect, which I think is interesting. She's got a lot of acclaim. You know, she's shown her work across the US for a long time. So she gets that in there as well as some of her teaching. But yeah, so she's an example of somebody who uses her bio sort of to educate the viewer. And I think it works well.
I really like Maria's bio. There's so many things in here that I could look for that would open a conversation with her, whether where she lives or her, she's worked here in Mission Viejo and Laguna Beach. But she's also talked about the organizations she's working with. She's really educating us a lot about scratchboard in most of these paragraphs. So she stays focused on, you know, her work in her medium, but gave us a lot of talking points too. I really think that this is a very successful bio.
Yeah. So Sharon has graciously agreed to be our guinea pig today and kind of go on the chopping block, which wasn't necessary. Her bio was really great, but she agreed to let us play with it a little bit. So Sharon, maybe you can share a little bit about your thinking when you were putting your bio together.
Sure. I took a very chronological approach when I was doing the biography, because that's kind of how I think of biographies. So I started out with, you know, way back in time when I was first studying dance, and how I evolved from that into the clay. And I think it's important also with the crystalline glazes to explain what those are. And so I flowed into that. And then I finish up with mentioning my exhibitions at the Festival of the Arts and other places. So yeah, I was interested to see what you guys would come up with to give this some more punch.
Yeah, as I said, I think, you know, everything that you did was completely appropriate and fine. I really wanted to know a little bit more about your accomplishments at the beginning, and they are many. So I thought, you know, again, Ron Azevedo style, if you led with those, it would be a little bit stronger and draw the viewer in. So I chose to start out with your work showing, I mean, you've shown almost 20 years in states all across the Western US. So I chose to lead with that, as well as showing in the Festival of Arts for quite a while. I still thought, you know, when somebody says ceramic artist, some of us tend to think coffee mugs and plates, and that is so not you, Sharon. So I really wanted to call out what makes your work unique and what makes you special. And so I wanted to get that in there, that movement that you incorporate into your work, the imagery that you incorporate into your work. And then come back around to show people why you have movement and imagery in your work. It all comes out of that experience that you have in dance. I think that's really great and to keep in there. So I wanted to get that in there, but I wanted to do it sort of in the Ron Azevedo style of starting strong, moving down the triangle to where you got your start, which is, you know, a nice base foundation. But lead with your heavy hitting stuff first. I don't know, Mike, do you like the before or the after?
I 100% like the revision, and I think Sharon is ready to hit the high marks and have the triangle style biography. This just putting the impactful information at the top is much more impactful to the viewer. And here's one of those areas where, what does modern dance have to do with ceramics? Well, actually, I think it's great that she kept it in, because it again makes me look more closely at her work and see that there's the movement. And I also picture her at her ceramics wheel, spinning around. And so I think that really is a unusual thing to put in, but it really, it's a pleasant surprise to read about, and makes me more engaged with Sharon's work. So Sharon, you're hitting the big time more with this new bio. I hope you're going to put it in.
Yeah, I'm sure I will.
One other thing that I should point out about Sharon's bio that Wendy pointed out when we were editing it. So Sharon's original, and actually my edits to it, all started with the word Sharon. And that is an example of that repetition that you're going to want to be on the lookout for. Varying your sentence structure, varying the way that you start a paragraph, varying the way that you start sentences, and repetition of words and phrases are something that just naturally, like I said, we speak in a certain way, in a certain cadence, and it's going to come out that way in a rough draft, and that's your job, is to edit it out. So I went back in revision number 6 or 7 and switched up the way those paragraphs started, so they didn't all start with the word Sharon.
Okay, so this is all very exciting. All of us artists have a lot of work to do ahead of us, but nothing is worse than a blank page right before you. So Marrie, how do we get unstuck, and where do we start?
Yeah, so what I like to say is blank pages are exactly like blank canvases, and they are not your friend. They're horrible. So just like artists throw paint onto their canvas, writers have to throw words onto the paper. Sometimes I really like to start in longhand, because the computer makes you feel like you're, very stiff, and it has to be right. And somehow if it's in ink, it looks very staid. If you do it in longhand, that's one way to kind of unlock yourself. Nothing feels so permanent when it's just written on a legal pad. But start with very messy drafts. Jot down everything that comes into your mind. Don't worry about editing it. Don't worry about what the words sound like. Don't worry about what it looks like. Just get it out, just like you would get a wash onto a canvas. If that still feels intimidating to you, you can record your oral thoughts into your phone. If you have a handy dandy iPhone and you turn on the voice memos, you can just start talking into it, stream of conscious, and a lot of ideas come out that way. If you're still intimidated, you can think about your work as someone else's and write about it from, sort of a third person outsider's point of view. Or, you can do what Ron Azevedo did with me and just ask people to look at your work and listen to the way they talk about it and the adjectives that they use. All of those things are going to get words onto the page. But ask yourself questions. Ask yourself, what gets your juices flowing? Why are you doing this? What is your why? And that will answer, I think, some questions for you that can serve you well, especially in the artist statement. But the more specific that you can be about what separates you from other artists in your medium, what gets you excited, what about your process, it may be a little bit different than the artist next door. All those things are good to think about. And I really would encourage you to try in editing your work to use as much of an active voice as opposed to a passive voice. And what I mean by that is verbs that are is, has, been are all passive voice words. And you can punch those up by using stronger verbs. And I've given you a couple of examples of how to do that here, of taking a passive voice and turning it into an active voice. And that shouldn't come until the editing process. Don't worry about that at the beginning, but that's one of the things to keep your eyes on. Similarly to that, during the editing process, not during the drafting process, you're going to want to avoid adverbs and adjectives. Adverbs are those words that end typically in ly. So deeply, quickly, all of those words can generally be eliminated in favor of stronger nouns or stronger verbs. This doesn't, have to be true. You can't not have any adverbs or adjectives in your work, but keep your eye out for them and try to eliminate them wherever you can. The biggest thing is to eliminate what I call artist speak. And these are these, overly broad statements that artists love to use. Nature is my paintbrush, or the world is my oyster, or I'm an out of the box thinker. All of those, first of all, if we've heard them before, somebody has used them to describe themselves that way before, and you should try to get those out. But every plein air artist is going to talk about beauty and nature and light and shadow, which is fine. But that's not separating you from the plein air painter next door. And it's not really adding that much to the conversation. We know what plein air painters do. We understand they're working with light and shadow. So give me something else. Give me something else that was going to make me curious about you and your work and your approach. We've talked about this several times today, but look for those words and phrases that repeat. Repetition of ways paragraphs start, the ways sentences are structured. Look for all of those things and try and get them out. And most importantly, proofreading. So my proofreading tips are Microsoft Word, if you're working in that, is going to catch a lot of these. Sometimes it will catch them to your detriment. So it will, if you mean hair on my head as opposed to, the rabbit hair, Word isn't going to catch that for you. And so you can rely on Word to a certain degree, but don't rely on it too much. So the ways to get yourself out of that are to change the font and size of your type. That will kind of jot your brain to see it differently. Printing it out and looking at it on paper is going to make you see it differently. Reading it out loud is going to catch a ton of mistakes, and showing it to other people and having them read it for you will catch even more. I cannot emphasize enough how many times you have to do this and not to skip this step, because you can look at something 100,000 times and you'll miss things. So put it away for a day, give it to 2 or 3 friends, come back to it and do it again.
I think I absolutely agree with what you just said there, working on it. And this is all adds up to getting started a little bit early, so you give yourself time. Another thing that I think is important is to practice it. Sometimes you're sitting next to someone at a sushi bar and you want to talk about your work. They'll say, well, I know a ceramic artist, Sharon Jackman. I'll go, well, mine is tile and I do pictorial, whereas her work is more sculptural. So there's ways you want to isolate yourself or make yourself look a little bit more what's unique about your work versus everybody else in your medium. I really like what you said about the plein air artists. Yes, that's true. They're all talking about light, color, and shadow, but maybe you want to talk about your color temperature. I use a cool palette as opposed to that other artist who uses a warm palette. So you're getting your viewer and your audience to really know much more about your work. And I found that my own clients really enjoy having those talking points. They hang my work in their dining room when they have guests over. The guests will come and say, wow, you bought a piece of art. Why did you buy that? Why did you like that artist? And they'll say, well, it's plein air. You all know what that is, but I like this artist because it's a cool palette, which looks very different from a lot of other artists. And my collectors have really, I call it arming them with language. So they are in a way able to help also sell your work to their friends or fellow collectors, because you've given them specific language that is mostly about you and your work. And I really think that's helpful. As well, when you're proofing, I'll often look at it on my cell phone, and that's another, or look at it on different devices when you're proofing it. That can help out too. And talk to maybe just some of your neighbors and tell them about your work and see how they respond to that, because you may be really off track and have to rethink it.
We should point out that we all had been looking at this slide for the last 2 weeks, and none of us, until right as we went on air, discovered that proofreading is misspelled.
There you go. Perfect.
So yeah, we're proving our own point, right? That
It's all one word. Yeah,
yeah,
proofreading.
it's all one word. So yes, so just to wrap up, start this process early. Give yourself a lot of time and don't wait until the last minute, because you're going to need days for this to marinate and for you to think about it, see it through fresh eyes, and come back to it. So yeah, give yourself a lot of lead time. I've mentioned this several times today, but it bears repeating that, if you get stuck, you've got examples all over the place to look at. On all 3 of the Laguna Festival's websites, every single artist has had to go through the same tortured task. So you can look at the ways they've approached it by me, especially I think on all 3 festival websites, but certainly on the FOA website, you can look at it by medium and just look at how all the jewelers, how all the acrylic artists went about this and see the different approaches they took. But the fun advice that I'll leave you with, and this is old writers' advice. Writers have heard this for, decades. I think it was attributed to Hemingway back in the day, but that has been debunked. But the advice is to write drunk and edit sober. That doesn't mean that you have to actually, get drunk to write, but the ethos behind the advice is really good, which is just come at this with a playful mind. Come at this very loose, without your editor's hat on, and just play on the page and see what sounds good and read it out loud. And then when it's all done, come back with, your trusty eyeglasses, put them on, sit up straight, put your hands at the keyboard and edit sober. Not only edit sober, but edit many, many times, because that's really what this requires. But it just like art, it can be very fun to play with writing, and it doesn't have to be as scary and as intimidating as a lot of people think it is. So go out there and have fun with it.
Wonderful. Thank you guys. What a great presentation. I want to say a big thank you to Mike Talbert and especially Marrie Stone for sharing all their tips and advice with us as we go into festival season and prepare to make, the best presentation we can for our new clients. So on behalf of the Artist Fund, we want to thank you for joining us today for our professional development webinar series. Please check our website for other presentations that are designed to help artists thrive. Here we have our contact sheet, so you can get in touch with us if needed, or any questions you might have. Our phone, our email, our website there, and especially our grant applications in case you or a fellow exhibiting artist would like to have that information, and also our information for Facebook and Instagram. Again, thank you for joining us today.